The truck's heater had given up somewhere past the Missouri border, and Thomas Brennan could see his breath crystallize in the cabin air as he drove. Beside him, curled on the passenger seat, with his graying muzzle tucked under one paw, Rex slept the fitful sleep of an old soldier, twitching at sounds only he could hear, chasing ghosts through dreams. Thomas understood. He had the same dreams. The advertisement had seemed like a cruel joke when he'd first seen it. Mountain cabin? $1 must remove from property by spring. But Thomas had learned long ago that sometimes salvation came, wrapped in absurdity. With his disability check barely covering rent in the city and winter coming hard, a $1 cabin in the Colorado Rockies wasn't a punchline. It was a lifeline. The snow began as they climbed into the mountains. First just a dusting that caught in the pine boughs, then a proper snowfall that turned the world into a snow globe. Someone had shaken too hard. Thomas gripped the wheel tighter. Rex lifted his head, brown eyes meeting his master's for a moment, and Thomas felt that familiar surge of gratitude for the animal's presence. They'd been through Afghanistan together, through the aftermath, through the long years when Thomas couldn't quite figure out how to be a person again. If Rex could keep going, so could he. The cabin appeared through the white curtain of falling snow like something from a fairy tale, and not one of the cheerful ones. It sagged against the hillside, its roof heavy with snow, one shutter hanging by a single hinge. The previous owner, according to the lawyer who'd handled the sale, had died without heirs. The property was being sold off piece by piece, and nobody wanted a structure that would cost more to demolish than it was worth. But to Thomas, stepping out into ankle-deep snow with Rex bounding ahead despite his arthritic hips, it was beautiful. It was his. For $1 and the promise to haul it away come spring, he had a place to weather the winter, to think, to heal, maybe even to live. The first 2 days passed in a blur of work. Thomas cleared the chimney, patched the worst of the roof holes with tarps and salvaged wood, and set up his sleeping bag near the fireplace. Rex explored every corner, sniffing at mouse holes and the mysteries only a dog could detect. At night, Thomas built fires that filled the single room with dancing shadows, and he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. On the third morning, Rex wouldn't settle. The dog paced the cabin, whining low in his throat, moving to the door and back to Thomas, then to the door again. Thomas recognized the behavior. Rex had done the same thing in Kandahar when he'd detected IEDs, when he'd sensed Taliban fighters in the darkness beyond their perimeter. The dog knew something Thomas didn't. "What is it, boy?" Thomas pulled on his heavy coat, noting how the wind had picked up during the night. Fresh snow was falling, already covering the tracks he'd made the day before. Rex was at the door, not barking, he never barked unnecessarily, but vibrating with urgency. They went out together into the white world. The cold bit at Thomas's face, and he pulled his scarf higher. Rex didn't head toward the road or the tree line where they'd seen deer tracks. Instead, he made straight for the old barn that stood about 50 yards from the cabin, a structure Thomas had noted but not yet explored. The barn door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. Snow had drifted inside, creating strange sculptures of white against the darkness. Rex disappeared into the shadows, and Thomas heard it then, a sound so soft he might have imagined it, a whimper that could have been the wind in the eaves. But Rex's barking said otherwise. Not the alert bark, but the distressed one, the sound he made when he'd found a wounded soldier in the rubble. Thomas's heart was hammering as he stepped into the barn, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. For a moment, he saw nothing but abandoned farm equipment and rotting hay bales. Then Rex barked again, and Thomas looked up. She was hanging from one of the roof beams, suspended by a rope around her wrists, her feet several inches from the ground. Her head lolled forward, dark hair covering her face, and she wore only jeans and a thin sweater, no coat, no shoes. Snow had blown in through gaps in the barn walls and settled on her shoulders like a mockery of a shawl. Thomas moved without thinking, the old training taking over. He dragged a hay bale underneath her, climbed up, and pulled his knife from his belt. The rope was frozen stiff, but the blade was sharp. She fell into his arms as the strands parted, a dead weight that made him stagger. But she wasn't dead. As he lowered her to the ground, he felt the faint flutter of her pulse against his fingers. Her skin was ice-cold, lips blue, but she was alive. Barely. "Rex, cabin, go!" The dog understood, racing ahead while Thomas gathered the girl in his arms. She couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. And he could feel every bone through her frozen clothes. Questions could wait. Right now, survival was all that mattered. The cabin had never seemed so far away. Snow was falling harder now, and Thomas's boots slipped on the icy ground. He could feel the girl's shallow breaths against his chest, could see the frost in her hair. How long had she been out there? Hours? All night? In this cold, it was a miracle she was alive at all. Inside, he laid her by the fire and began the careful work of warming. Someone on the edge of hypothermia. He'd seen it before, knew the dangers of warming too quickly. He stripped off her frozen clothes, trying not to notice the bruises on her arms, the way her wrists were raw and bleeding where the rope had cut into them, and wrapped her in his sleeping bag and the spare blankets from his truck. Rex lay down beside her, adding his warmth to hers, and Thomas built up the fire. He heated water, made weak tea with sugar, and when her eyelids began to flutter, he held the cup to her lips. She didn't wake fully, not at first. She drifted in and out, murmuring words Thomas couldn't understand. But slowly, over the course of hours, color returned to her face. Her shivering intensified, a good sign. Thomas knew the body fighting back, and finally, as afternoon light filtered weakly through the cabin's single window, her eyes opened. They were blue, those eyes, and filled with terror. "It's okay," Thomas said quietly, keeping his distance, letting her see him clearly. "You're safe." "I'm Thomas. This is Rex. We found you in the barn." She stared at him, then at Rex, then around the cabin. He watched her processing, saw the moment she remembered, saw the fear transform into something even worse, despair. "You should have left me," she whispered, her voice raw. Thomas had heard those words before. From other soldiers, from himself in the dark times. He knew the weight of them. "Can't do that," he said simply. "Not how I'm built." Her name was Sarah. The story came out slowly over the next hours, interrupted by long silences and moments when she couldn't continue. She was 19 years old. She'd been staying with her boyfriend in a house about 5 miles down the mountain. The boyfriend who had beaten her when she'd tried to leave. The boyfriend who had driven her to the abandoned barn, tied her up, and left her to freeze to death when she'd threatened to go to the police. "He said no one would find me until spring," she said, staring into the fire. "He said I'd be frozen solid, just another winter casualty. An accident." Thomas felt the old rage building, the kind that had gotten him in trouble before. But he pushed it down, focused on what mattered. "Do you have family? Someone we can call?" She shook her head. "My mom's in England. We haven't spoken in 2 years. Since I dropped out of university to come here with Jake. I was so stupid." "You're alive," Thomas said. "That's not stupid. That's a fighter." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his weathered face, the gray in his beard, the way he moved with careful precision. "You're military. Was Marines. Rex and I both served. And now you're living in an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere." "Bought it for $1, Thomas said with a slight smile. "Best investment I ever made. Saved your life, didn't it?" That almost got a smile from her, almost. The snow continued to fall through the afternoon and into the evening. Thomas tried his cell phone, but there was no signal. There never was, this far up the mountain. His truck could probably make it down to where they could call for help, but in this weather, it would be dangerous. And there was another problem, one that made Thomas's jaw tighten every time he thought about it. "This, Jake," he said as darkness fell, and he prepared a simple meal of canned soup and crackers. "He think you're dead?" Sarah nodded, accepting the bowl he handed her. "And then he might come back. Check on things. Make sure," but her hand shook, soup sloshing. "I didn't think of that." "Or I did," Thomas said quietly. "And if he comes, he won't find what he expects." Rex, lying by Sarah's feet, lifted his head and growled low in his throat. Not at her, at the door, at something outside. Thomas moved to the window. careful not to silhouette himself against the firelight. Through the falling snow, he could see headlights, still distant but coming up the mountain road. His road. The only thing up here was his cabin and the barn. "Get in the back room," Thomas said, his voice calm but commanding. "Take Rex. Don't come out until I say to." Thomas, now, Sarah did. She went, and Thomas heard the back room door close. He checked the lock on the cabin door, flimsy, but it would do, and positioned himself to the side of the window where he could see out, but couldn't be easily seen. The truck, a big black Ford, pulled up next to Thomas's vehicle. A man got out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat. He looked around, seeming surprised to see Thomas's truck, to see smoke coming from the cabin's chimney. He hadn't expected anyone to be here. Thomas opened the door before the man could knock. "Help you?" Thomas kept his voice neutral, his body blocking the entrance. The man was younger than Thomas had expected, maybe 25, with the kind of good looks that probably got him whatever he wanted. Until they didn't. "I'm looking for my girlfriend," he said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "She ran off yesterday after we had a fight. I'm worried about her in this weather. Thought she might have taken shelter in the old barn." "Haven't seen anyone," Thomas said. "Just me and my dog." The man's eyes narrowed. "Mind if I check the barn?" I do, actually. This is my property. Bought it legal, daughter, or the barn too?" "Good, the barn too." They stared at each other, and Thomas saw the moment the man's mask slipped, saw the violence underneath. He'd seen that look before, in enemies and God help him. Sometimes in the mirror. "Look, old man, I don't know what your deal is, but if you're hiding her, I'm not hiding anyone. I'm telling you to leave my property, now." The man took a step forward and Thomas didn't move. He'd faced down Taliban fighters, insurgents who wanted him dead. This entitled boy man didn't scare him. What happened next happened fast. The man shoved Thomas, trying to push past him into the cabin. Thomas, smaller but trained, used the man's momentum against him, stepping aside and letting him stumble forward. The man caught himself, turned with rage in his eyes, and found himself facing Rex, who had emerged from the back room at the sound of conflict. The dog was old, yes, but he was still 70 pounds of muscle and teeth, and his lips were pulled back in a snarl. Thomas had seen clear rooms in Afghanistan. "Call off your dog," the man said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Rex, stay." The dog remained motionless, focused. "Here's how this is going to work," Thomas said quietly. "You're going to get in your truck. You're going to drive down this mountain. Tomorrow, when the snow clears, I'm going to drive into town. I'm going to the sheriff's office, and I'm going to tell them about what I found in that barn." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And so will they when they see the rope, when they hear from the girl you left to die, when they see what you did to her." The man's face went white, then red. "She's alive?" "Very much so, and very willing to talk to the police." For a moment, Thomas thought the man might try something stupid. His hands clenched into fists, his body tensing. But Rex's growl deepened, and whatever courage or stupidity the man had possessed drained away. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward the door. "Yes," Thomas said, "it is. Because if you ever come near her again, if you ever even think about coming near her, you'll have to deal with me. And I've dealt with worse than you in places that make this mountain look like paradise." The man left, his truck fishtailing in the snow as he gunned the engine in impotent rage. Thomas watched until the taillights disappeared, then closed and locked the door. Sarah emerged from the back room, her face wet with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. We still need to get you somewhere safe. Get you to people who can help. I don't know where that is anymore." Thomas looked at this young woman who reminded him of his daughter, the daughter who'd stopped calling years ago. When his drinking got bad, when the nightmares made him someone she didn't recognize, he thought about Rex, who had never stopped believing in him even when he'd stopped believing in himself. He thought about second chances, about how they sometimes came wrapped in snow and desperation and $1 cabins. "I might," he said, "but first let's get through tonight." They sat by the fire, the three of them, as the snow continued to fall outside. Thomas told Sarah about Afghanistan, about coming home broken, about the long climb back to something resembling human. She told him about England, about her mother who she missed more than she could say, about dreams of university that weren't as dead as she'd thought. And Rex, wise Rex, lay between them, his presence a reminder that loyalty existed, that goodness existed, that sometimes the world offered up small miracles in the form of a dog's keen nose and a veteran's unwillingness to give up on another lost soul. In the morning, Thomas would drive Sarah to town. He'd go with her to the sheriff's office, would stand beside her as she told her story. He'd help her call her mother, would wait with her until family or social services or someone could take over. He'd make sure she was safe. But for now, in this cabin that had cost him $1 and given him back his purpose, they simply existed. 3 survivors weathering the storm together, proof that sometimes the coldest nights give way to the warmest dawns. Outside, the snow fell clean and white, covering the tracks of those who'd come before, offering the blank page of a fresh start. And inside, by the fire's glow, hope flickered back to life, fragile as a candle flame, but burning nonetheless. Thomas looked at Sarah, at Rex, at the life he'd accidentally built in 3 short days. And he understood something he hadn't in years. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And sometimes that was the bravest thing a person could do. The story wound to its close as the fire burned low and Sarah finally slept, Rex keeping watch beside her. Thomas sat awake, as he often did. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, the darkness didn't feel quite so heavy. He had purpose again. He had people who needed him. He had proof that even in the deepest winter, even when death seemed certain, life could find a way to persist. All it took was a loyal dog, a $1 cabin, and the courage to keep moving forward, one step at a time through the snow.